Why would anyone build a city bigger than London in the middle of nowhere 1,000 years ago? Why did 20,000 people haul millions of baskets of dirt to stack them into giant mounds? And why did they all just leave? Today you can drive through southwestern Illinois, past strip malls and gas stations, completely unaware that beneath your wheels lies one of the most sophisticated urban centers ever built in North America. While medieval Europeans were constructing stone cathedrals, people here were moving earth on a scale that challenges everything we think we know about pre-Columbian America. In the next 10 minutes, you will understand why archaeologists call Cahokia the most important site north of Mexico, and why its disappearance remains one of history's most stubborn mysteries. Cahokia sits directly across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, in the floodplain of southwestern Illinois. The State Archaeology Park today covers 2,200 acres, roughly 3.5 square miles, and protects about 80 man-made mounds. But that protected area represents only a fraction of what once stood here. At its peak, the ancient city sprawled across 6 square miles, an urban landscape that included about 120 earthworks in a wide range of sizes, shapes, and functions. Most drivers on Interstate 55 have no idea they're passing within a mile of what was once the largest city north of Mexico. The floodplain location was no accident. This spot offered rich soil, abundant water, and access to trade routes that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi River was the interstate highway of its time, and Cahokia controlled a prime junction. Today the site sits wedged between East St. Louis and Collinsville, surrounded by warehouses and subdivisions. You can stand on top of the largest mound and see the gateway arch glinting in the distance, a monument to westward expansion built without awareness of the sophisticated society that thrived here centuries before Columbus. The contrast is quietly absurd. America built a national park to commemorate Lewis and Clark, but the city that predated them by 700 years gets a modest state facility and minimal signage. Around 1100 CE, Cahokia reached its apex with a population estimated between 15,000 and 20,000 people. To put that in perspective, London in the year 1100 had roughly 15,000 inhabitants. Paris had about 25,000. Cahokia was not a village or a ceremonial center visited seasonally by scattered tribes. It was an actual city, a densely populated urban area with permanent residents, social hierarchies, and specialized labor. The 120 earthworks came in different sizes, shapes, and functions, suggesting a complex society with varied needs and purposes. Some mounds were residential platforms where elite families built their homes above the commoners. Others served ceremonial functions, aligned with solstice, sunrises, or lunar cycles. Still others were burial sites, containing the remains of leaders surrounded by grave goods that speak to wealth and status. The scale challenges the tidy narrative that pre-Columbian North America consisted mainly of nomadic hunter-gatherers. Cahokia had neighborhoods. It had a downtown. It had urban planning that required coordination, authority, and a shared vision of what the city should become. The population density in the Central Plaza area likely matched or exceeded that of contemporary European cities. And all of this happened without horses, without iron tools, without wheeled vehicles, and without a written language to coordinate the effort. The organizational capacity required to sustain a city this size, in this era, suggests political structures we are still trying to fully understand. But raw population numbers only hint at the real mystery. How did they actually build this place? The 80 mounds that survive today, out of the original 120, were built entirely by human labor using baskets to move earth one load at a time. No domesticated animals hauled the dirt. No wheel carts made the work easier. No metal shovels cut into the clay. People dug soil from borrow pits with wooden tools and stone blades, loaded it into woven baskets that held perhaps 50 pounds of earth, carried those baskets to the construction site, climbed the growing mound, and dumped the load. Then they walked back down and did it again. Archaeologists estimate that the largest mound alone contains more than 14 million cubic feet of soil. If a basket held 1 cubic foot of dirt, that single structure represents 14 million trips up and down a slope that grew steeper with every layer. The labor organization required to coordinate thousands of workers over decades is staggering. Someone had to plan the mound's shape and orientation. Someone had to designate borrow pit locations to avoid undermining nearby structures. Someone had to manage work crews, probably organized by kinship groups or neighborhoods, and ensure a steady supply of laborers. And this wasn't a one-time project. The city built 120 of these earthworks in different sizes and configurations across 6 square miles of floodplain. Some mounds were relatively small, perhaps 20 feet high. Others rose in terrace platforms that reached 10 stories. The variation in size and shape suggests different purposes, but every single one required the same grinding repetition. Basket after basket, year after year, generation after generation. The physical effort embedded in Cahokia's landscape is almost impossible to comprehend from the quiet, grassy mounds visible today. The central structure at Cahokia, now called Monk's Mound, is the largest pre-Columbian earthwork north of Mexico. It rises in 4 terraces to a height of roughly 100 feet, covering more than 14 acres at its base. The top platform alone is large enough to hold a building the size of a football field. French monks in the early 19th century built a monastery on one of the terraces, giving the mound its current name and completely missing the point of what they were standing on. This was not a natural hill. It was a deliberately engineered platform that took approximately 200 years to complete, built in stages as the city grew and refined its vision. The terrace design suggests it served as a foundation for important structures, likely the residence of the paramount leader or a temple complex visible from across the city. From the summit, you could see the entire urban landscape spread below. The plazas, the residential areas, the smaller mounds marking neighborhoods and ceremonial spaces. The mound's alignment and position reinforce its centrality to Cahokia's social and spiritual life. In terms of volume, Monk's Mound rivals the base of the Great Pyramid at Giza, though it is not as tall. The comparison is not hyperbolic. Both structures represent societies mobilizing massive labor forces to create monuments that express power, cosmology, and social order. Yet most Americans have never heard of Monk's Mound. It does not appear in standard history textbooks. It is not a national landmark. It sits quietly in a state park, visited mostly by school groups and archaeology enthusiasts, while the broader culture remains largely unaware of the engineering achievement it represents. But Monk's Mound was only the centerpiece of a much more sophisticated urban design. The wide range of sizes, shapes, and functions among Cahokia's 120 earthworks reveals a city designed with intentionality and social complexity. Ridgetop mounds ran in straight lines, possibly marking boundaries or processional routes. Conical mounds served as burial sites, with grave goods that included copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and mica from the Appalachians, evidence of trade networks spanning half a continent. Platform mounds elevated elite residences above the floodplain, a literal expression of social hierarchy visible to everyone below. The Grand Plaza, a 50-acre open space in the city's center, was flattened and leveled for public gatherings, games, and ceremonies. Wooden post circles, reconstructed from archaeological evidence, tracked solar and lunar cycles with precision that rivals Stonehenge. The most famous, Woodhenge, aligned perfectly with sunrise on the equinoxes and solstices when viewed from a specific point on Monk's Mound. This was not accidental. The city's builders integrated astronomy, ceremony, and urban planning into a unified design. The diversity of mound types suggests specialized functions in a society differentiated by role, status, and purpose. Commoners lived in thatched houses clustered around smaller mounds. Artisans worked in dedicated areas, producing pottery, tools, and ceremonial objects. Elites resided on platform mounds, physically and symbolically elevated above the population. The city was not egalitarian. It was stratified, organized, and maintained through systems of authority and belief that archaeologists are still working to decode. But the very fact that this complexity existed, that 120 earthworks served distinct purposes within a single urban plan, tells us we are looking at a civilization, not a collection of villages. 1100 CE marks Cahokia's apex, the moment of maximum population, influence, and territorial reach. The city's power extended through trade and tribute networks across the Mississippi River Valley and beyond. Satellite communities adopted Cahokian architectural styles and pottery techniques, evidence of cultural dominance, if not outright political control. But within 200 years, the population began to decline. By 1300 CE, the city was largely abandoned. By the time European explorers arrived in the 16th century, Cahokia was empty, its mounds overgrown, its purpose forgotten even by the native peoples living nearby. Only 80 of the original 120 mounds survive today, the rest destroyed by farming, urban development, and simple erosion. Highways cut through former neighborhoods. A subdivision sits on top of what was once a ceremonial complex. The reasons for Cahokia's collapse remain debated. Environmental degradation is one theory. The city may have exhausted local timber, depleted soil through intensive agriculture, and polluted water sources. Climate change is another. A regional drought or cooling period could have undermined the agricultural surplus that fed the city. Social upheaval is a third, perhaps internal conflict, religious transformation, or the breakdown of chiefly authority scattered the population. No single explanation fully accounts for why 20,000 people would abandon a city they had spent centuries building. What we know is that the decline was gradual, not a sudden catastrophe. People left over generations, the mounds slowly falling silent. Cahokia's disappearance is not a mystery in the sense of lacking evidence. It is a mystery in the sense that the evidence points in multiple directions and we may never isolate a single cause. Cahokia challenges the comfortable story that complex urban civilization in the Americas began with European contact. At its apex in 1100 CE, it was larger than London, built without metal tools or draft animals, and organized through social structures we're still working to understand. 20,000 people lived in a city of 120 earthworks, moved millions of cubic feet of earth by hand, tracked celestial cycles with precision, and traded across half a continent. Then they left, and the city fell silent. Today, 80 mounds survive in a state park most people drive past without a second glance. The mystery is not just why Cahokia was abandoned, but why we have worked so hard to forget it existed in the first place. Next time you're near St. Louis, take an hour and visit the site. Walk to the top of Monk's Mound. Look across the floodplain and imagine 120 earthworks, thousands of homes, and a plaza filled with people. The silence is louder when you know what used to be there.